The invitation arrived a week earlier, tucked in between bills and junk mail. Alex, our boss, was throwing a massive birthday bash to celebrate turning 38. My wife, Mia, and I had both worked under Alex for years. He was the charismatic type, always the loudest in the room, quick with compliments, and even quicker with expectations. We respected him, sure, but he had a way of making himself the center of everything, and this party was no exception. He'd rented a massive 4-story house for the weekend, invited half the office, old friends, and God knows who else. 50, maybe 60 people were coming. It was going to be loud, wild, exactly the kind of spectacle Alex loved. Mia seemed unusually excited about it. Her energy contagious. She spent the week leading up to the party talking about how important it was to show up, how we should both make an impression. It didn't strike me as strange at first. She'd always been someone who cared about doing well at work, about making the right connections. But looking back, maybe there was something in her tone, a little too eager, like she was trying to convince herself as much as she was convincing me. The night of the party, Mia was glowing. She wore a black dress that hugged her in all the right ways, her hair swept up neatly, the way I loved it. I caught myself watching her from the living room mirror while she finished her makeup in the bathroom. She looked back at me and smiled, and I remember thinking, how did I get this lucky? We were one of those couples people looked up to, married for almost 5 years, no kids yet, but we were happy. At least, I thought we were. When we got to the house, the party was already in full swing. The music thumped through the walls, lights flashing like it was a club rather than someone's rental. There were faces I recognized, co-workers, a few mutual friends, and then a sea of strangers. Alex greeted us at the door with his usual wide grin, pulling Mia into a hug that lingered just a second too long. I told myself it was nothing. He was always friendly like that, a little too touchy. Mia smiled at him, her eyes sparkling under the neon lights. And that's when the first sliver of doubt crept into my mind. As the night wore on, the alcohol flowed freely, and the mood shifted from polite mingling to something looser, more reckless. I tried to stay in the mix, nursing a whiskey and making small talk, but Mia drifted away, always toward Alex. I'd spot her across the room, leaning in close as they laughed together, her hand grazing his arm. She seemed different, nervous almost, not like her usual self. She was always friendly, always knew how to play the social game, but tonight there was a tension in her movements, a flutter of something I couldn't quite place. At first I told myself it was nothing. It was just a party after all. Alex was our boss. If Mia wanted to get on his good side, it was only natural. But as the night wore on, that little sliver of doubt turned into something sharper, twisting in my gut. Every time I looked for her, she was with him. I tried to shake it off. She was just being polite, making conversation, I thought. And Alex was the kind of guy people gravitated toward. There was no reason to think anything of it. But then I noticed the way she looked at him, like she was hanging on every word, every laugh. And the way he touched her back when he passed her a drink, his hand lingering at the small of her spine. It was subtle, so subtle I wondered if anyone else noticed. Maybe no one did. Maybe it was just me, sitting on that couch, nursing my drink and letting paranoia creep in where it didn't belong. I called out to Mia at one point, but she didn't hear me. Or maybe she did and pretended not to. Either way, it stung. I felt a knot tighten in my chest, a mixture of frustration and embarrassment. She's just being friendly, I told myself again, over and over like a mantra. But no matter how many times I repeated it, it didn't make the feeling go away. The hours blurred together in a haze of music, laughter, and too much alcohol. At some point, I found myself lying on a couch in one of the quieter corners of the house, my head spinning from the whiskey. I closed my eyes, hoping the world would stop tilting, and I called out for Mia again, this time more out of instinct than anything else. She wasn't there. I waited, assuming she was just outside or chatting with someone upstairs. But as half an hour slipped by, a cold unease settled in. I sat up slowly, the room still swaying, and glanced around. No sign of her. I stood, the floor unsteady beneath my feet, and made my way through the crowd, searching. I asked a few people if they'd seen her. Most shrugged, too drunk to care. One girl thought she saw her head toward the 3rd floor. That made sense. Mia loved quiet corners at big parties. Maybe she'd gone upstairs to play one of those dumb board games she always insisted on dragging me into. But when I reached the third floor, what I found was not a game. At first, all I heard was muffled laughter, the sound bleeding through one of the doors at the far end of the hall. My heart pounded as I approached, each step heavier than the last. She's just with friends, I told myself. Just having fun like always. When I pushed the door open, I saw exactly that. Mia sitting on the floor with a group of friends, red-faced from laughing too hard. She looked up when I entered, her expression unreadable, like she hadn't expected me to find her there. I told her I wasn't feeling well, that I wanted to go home. She hesitated, glancing toward Alex, who was sitting just a little too close. Then she smiled at me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Stay a bit longer," she said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. And in that moment, something cracked inside me. I nodded, forcing a smile, and told her it was fine. Told her I'd head home and see her later. I didn't wait for a response. I just turned and walked away, down the stairs, through the sea of strangers, and out the front door into the cool night air. I should have felt relieved, but as I stumbled into the cab, waiting at the curb, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that the night had only just begun. And not in the drive home blurred into a mix of streetlights streaking past the window and the faint hum of the driver's radio. I leaned against the cool glass, my head buzzing from too much whiskey and too many unanswered questions. My stomach churned, not just from the alcohol, but from something heavier, something I couldn't yet name. I told myself it was paranoia, fatigue, or some combination of the two. But that gnawing doubt wouldn't leave me alone. When I stumbled through the front door, the silence of the house greeted me like an old friend. No pounding music, no chattering voices, just the quiet hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I kicked off my shoes, tossed my jacket over a chair, and made my way to the bedroom, not bothering to turn on the lights. The bed felt colder than usual as I sank into it, the room tilting as I lay on my back, eyes closed. I hadn't even bothered to brush my teeth or change clothes. Just pulled the blanket over me and tried to let sleep take me. Mia would come home soon, I told myself. It was fine. She'd show up, crawl in a bed beside me, and tomorrow we'd laugh off the night like we always did. I drifted in and out of a restless sleep, caught in that uneasy place where dreams bleed into reality. I dreamed of the party, of Alex's grin, Mia's hand on his arm. And then, somewhere deep in that haze, I heard it, the front door creaking open. I snapped awake, heart pounding in my chest, disoriented in the dark. For a moment, I thought I was still at the party, still lying on that couch with the music throbbing around me. But the house was quiet, save for the soft, unsteady shuffle of footsteps moving through the hall. It was her. I glanced at the clock glowing on the nightstand. 3:12 a.m. Mia was just getting home. The door to our bedroom creaked open, and she stumbled inside, swaying like she'd been dragged backward through a storm. Her hair was a tangled mess, her makeup smeared across her face in uneven streaks. The black dress she'd worn, the one that had looked so perfect just hours ago, was crumpled, hanging off one shoulder like she'd wrestled with it on the way home. She looked destroyed, not just drunk, but used up, as if the night had wrung every ounce of life out of her and left her hollow. I didn't say anything at first, just lay there, watching her fumble with her shoes, muttering curses under her breath as one slipped from her grasp and clattered to the floor. She didn't even notice me awake, too far gone in whatever haze she was caught in. She crawled into bed without a word, her body heavy with exhaustion. The scent of sweat, alcohol, and something sour lingered on her skin. I lay stiff beside her, listening to her shallow, uneven breathing as she passed out almost instantly. I should have asked her where she'd been, what had kept her out until 3 in the morning. But something held me back, a sinking sense that whatever answer she gave me wouldn't be the truth. And maybe, deep down, I wasn't ready to hear it. Not yet. The next morning, sunlight poured through the blinds, splitting the room into streaks of shadow and light. Mia lay beside me, snoring softly, her face turned into the pillow. I watched her for a moment, trying to make sense of the knots in my chest. She looked so peaceful, like nothing had happened, like the events of the previous night had evaporated with the dawn. I slipped out of bed quietly, not wanting to wake her. I needed coffee, something to clear the fog in my head and settle the gnawing pit in my stomach. As I brewed a pot, the memories of the night before clung to me like cobwebs I couldn't shake. Her absence at the party, the way she'd stayed behind with Alex, the state she'd come home in, none of it sat right. By the time noon rolled around, Mia was still asleep, and I'd settled on the couch with my phone, scrolling through emails and mindlessly checking social media. That's when I saw it, a notification blinking on my feed, a message from someone I didn't know. Curious, I opened it and my heart dropped. A video link. The title read, "Wife dances naked at boss's party." At first, I stared at the screen, convinced it had to be some kind of sick joke. A mistake. Someone else, not her. I hovered my thumb over the link, hesitation freezing me in place. But curiosity, or maybe dread, pushed me to tap it. The video started with the familiar thump of music I remembered from the party. The camera was shaky, panning through a crowded room filled with laughing, drunk people. And then it found her Mia. There she was, standing on a table in the middle of the room, her dress already gone. She swayed to the music, bare skin glistening under the dim lights as the crowd cheered her on. My heart pounded against my ribcage, each beat heavier than the last. Alex's voice cut through the noise, unmistakable. "Dance, baby, just like that," he called, his words slurred with alcohol. The camera zoomed in, capturing every humiliating second as Mia twirled, oblivious to the phones pointed at her, recording her every move. I watched numb as she laughed and stumbled, her body moving in ways that made my stomach twist with shame. She didn't care. She was lost in it, lost in the thrill, the attention, the moment. And Alex. He stood close, too close, his grin wide as he raised a glass to her, like she was his personal entertainment. The video ended abruptly, cutting off in the middle of the chaos. But the damage was done. I stared at the black screen, my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone. My chest tightened, the weight of humiliation pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. How could she do this? How could she strip herself bare in front of all those people? Our boss, our friends, and laugh like it meant nothing. The sound of movement from the bedroom snapped me out of my daze. Mia was awake, stirring under the blankets, unaware of the storm brewing just beyond the door. I sat there, paralyzed by a mixture of rage, disbelief, and betrayal. The video played on a loop in my mind, each frame searing itself into my memory. I could already see the fallout, the gossip, the shame, the messages from friends asking if I'd seen it yet. And there she was, just a few steps away, sleeping off the night like it was nothing more than a bad hangover. The anger rose in me like a tidal wave, threatening to swallow me whole. But for now, I stayed frozen, my phone clutched in my trembling hand, staring at the evidence of the woman I thought I knew, and realizing she had just burned our entire life. I don't know how long I sat there on the couch, staring at my phone. Minutes? Hours? Time twisted into something meaningless as that video replayed in my head, over and over. Mia's laugh, the cheers, Alex's voice urging her on. It all echoed, poisoning every thought. I tried to shake it off, to convince myself that maybe I'd imagined some of it, that this was just a cruel misunderstanding. But the screen didn't lie. She had danced naked in front of everyone, our boss, friends, strangers. She'd let herself be put on display for their amusement, completely throwing away her dignity. Throwing away my dignity. The bedroom door creaked open behind me, and I heard Mia's light footsteps pad across the floor. She walked into the living room, still groggy, wearing one of my oversized t-shirts. I could feel her presence before she even said a word, as if the air around me tightened the moment she entered the room. "Morning," she mumbled, her voice scratchy with sleep, oblivious to the storm brewing in my chest. I snapped. Without thinking, I shot up from the couch, the phone clenched so tightly in my hand that my knuckles turned white. The sound of my chair scraping against the floor made her flinch. Before she could say anything else, I stormed toward her, the anger bubbling to the surface like boiling water, finally spilling over. "You thought I wouldn't see it, huh?" I hissed, holding my phone out toward her. My voice was shaky, low, but full of something dangerous. You thought it'd stay hidden? Mia blinked, her confusion turning to alarm as she looked at the phone in my hand. What? What are you talking about? She asked, her voice nervous, as if she already knew but wanted to pretend she didn't. I pressed the screen to her face, shoving the video into her line of sight. This, I yelled, my voice cracking under the weight of my rage. Explain this to me, Mia. Explain how you thought this was okay. Her face paled as she watched the video, realization hitting her like a freight train. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked from the phone to me, her eyes wide with panic, searching for words that wouldn't come. It's not, she stammered, but I was already past the point of listening. Not what it looks like. I interrupted, my voice rising with every word. You were naked, dancing in front of everyone. You humiliated yourself, humiliated me. Do you even get what you've done? Tears welled up in her eyes as she tried to reach for me, her voice desperate now. I didn't mean to. I swatted her hand away, my anger sharp enough to cut. You didn't mean to? I barked. You didn't mean to strip in front of our boss and every drunk idiot at that party? You didn't mean to make me the punchline of some sick joke? Are you serious, Mia? She sobbed quietly, her hands trembling as she tried to form an apology, but every word that left her mouth felt hollow. I could see it in her face. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry she'd been caught. The rage consumed me then, a beast that clawed its way out of my chest. I couldn't stop it, didn't even try to. I grabbed the lamp from the side table and hurled it across the room, watching it shatter against the wall in an explosion of glass. Mia gasped, backing away, her hands covering her mouth. Please! But I didn't care. I was far beyond reason. Every object within reach became collateral damage. The picture frame on the mantel, the vase we'd bought on a vacation years ago, the remote control. I grabbed and smashed them all. Anything to let the anger out, anything to drown out the images playing in my mind. You ruined everything, I shouted, kicking over the coffee table with a crash. Do you even understand that? You burned it all down, Mia. You threw everything away. She stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, helpless as I tore through the living room like a tornado. But none of it mattered. Nothing could undo what she'd done. I had given her my trust, my heart, my life, and she had thrown it all away for a stupid night of attention. I pointed toward the door, my hand trembling with fury. Get out, I said, my voice low and cold now, the anger settling into something heavier, something final. Mia's lips quivered. Where am I supposed to go? I don't care, I snapped. Go back to Alex. Go stay with one of your friends. But you're not staying here. Not anymore. She stared at me, stunned, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. But I was done. I couldn't look at her, couldn't even stand to be near her. Get out, I repeated, my voice hard. I mean it, Mia. Get out. She fumbled with her things, grabbing her keys and purse through a haze of tears. She begged me with her eyes, one last attempt to cling to what little was left between us. But I turned away, refusing to give her that chance. The front door opened with a creak, and then she was gone, her sobs fading into the night. I stood in the wreckage of our living room, breathing hard, my heart pounding against my ribcage. The silence that followed was deafening, but I welcomed it. I collapsed onto the couch, burying my face in my hands, feeling the weight of everything settle onto my shoulders. The adrenaline left me, and in its place came something darker, a crushing sense of loss, of failure. I had kicked her out, destroyed everything in my path. But the real damage, the kind she had inflicted, wasn't something I could break or smash. It was inside me, gnawing at my insides, a wound that wouldn't heal. And as I sat there, surrounded by the broken remains of our life, I realized that the worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was knowing that no matter how the hours after Mia left dragged on like a bad dream, I couldn't wake from. I sat on the couch, staring blankly at the shattered pieces of our life scattered around the room. The sunlight moved across the walls as the day inched forward, but I stayed in place, numb, drained. I thought throwing her out would bring some kind of relief, a sense of justice. But all it did was leave a hollow pit in my chest, as if something vital had been ripped out and replaced with nothing. I kept replaying everything in my head. The video, her vacant expression when she walked in at 3 a.m., the sick realization that the woman I thought I knew had betrayed me in front of everyone. I tried to piece together how we'd gotten here, but every memory twisted into something ugly, stained by what I'd seen. The lies, the humiliation, the shame. It felt like a noose tightening around me with every passing minute. I wanted to believe that she'd been caught in a bad moment, that it was a one-time thing born out of drunken stupidity. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the whole story. There were too many little signs, moments I'd ignored because I trusted her. And now I had no idea how much of my life had been built on lies. Hours passed. My phone buzzed a few times with notifications, but I ignored them. I knew what they were: messages from friends, maybe co-workers, people who had seen the video by now. Each buzz felt like a reminder of my own failure, another person laughing behind my back. Then sometime in the late afternoon, my phone rang. At first, I didn't plan to answer it, until I saw the name on the screen: Albert. Albert was one of the few people I could still call friend. He'd been at the party last night, and though I hadn't noticed him much, seeing his name now made something stir inside me. Hope, maybe, or desperation. I answered. "Hey man," I said, my voice hoarse from shouting earlier. "What's up?" There was a pause on the other end, a heavy silence that made my stomach twist. "Look, I need to tell you something," Albert said, his voice low. "I should have called you earlier, but I didn't know how. I saw everything that happened last night." My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. "What do you mean?" "You saw." "Yeah," he cut in quickly. "I was there when Mia, when it got out of hand. I tried to pull her away, man. I swear I did. But Alex, he wouldn't let it go. He kept pushing her, egging her on." I gritted my teeth, gripping the phone tighter. Pushing her how? He was pouring drinks, telling her she had to dance for him, that it was her job to keep the party fun, Albert said, guilt heavy in his voice. He made it sound like a joke, but he wasn't joking. Every time she tried to leave, he'd grab her arm, tell her not to be boring, that she had to loosen up, and she was already drunk, way too drunk. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "He forced her?" Albert sighed. "Not exactly. He didn't hold a gun to her head or anything, but he knew what he was doing. You know how Alex is. He gets what he wants, and no one tells him no. She was too wasted to fight back, and he made sure everyone else thought it was just a bit of fun." The rage that had simmered inside me all day now exploded, white-hot and all-consuming. It wasn't just Mia who had betrayed me. It was him, Alex, our boss, the guy I'd worked for, trusted. He had taken everything, my wife, my dignity, and turned it into a game. That smug son of a... I stopped myself, clenching my jaw so hard my teeth ached. "There's more," Albert said, hesitating for a second. "After you left the party, I saw him. He was bragging to a few guys about it, laughing, said he'd been waiting for a chance like this for a long time." I froze. "What do you mean? Waiting for a chance?" Albert's voice was grim. He said Mia had always been a tease at work, and this was his way of finally seeing if she'd follow through. Like it was some sick prize. My vision blurred with fury, the room tilting as the weight of Albert's words settled in. Alex hadn't just taken advantage of a drunk moment. He'd planned this. He'd been waiting for the perfect opportunity to humiliate me, to use my wife for his own entertainment. I couldn't breathe. "You still there?" Albert asked, his voice cautious. "Yeah," I managed to choke out. "I'm here. Look, man, I know it's bad, but don't do anything stupid, okay? Just think this through." But I was already on my feet, the phone slipping from my hand and landing with a dull thud on the couch. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out everything else. I didn't think as I drove to Alex's place. The anger guided me, every mile blurring together until I was standing in front of his house, my fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. I knew what I was about to do wasn't smart, wasn't rational, but I didn't care. He'd ruined my life, and now he was going to pay for it. I pounded on the door, each hit echoing through the quiet street. It opened slowly, and there he stood, looking half surprised, half amused, like I was some kind of joke that had shown up on his doorstep. "Didn't expect to see you here," Alex said with a smirk, his voice dripping with arrogance. "What's the matter? Can't handle your wife's wild side?" Before he could say another word, I lunged. The first punch landed square on his jaw, the satisfying crunch of impact sending shockwaves up my arm. He stumbled back, eyes wide with disbelief, but I didn't give him a chance to recover. I hit him again, once, twice, years of frustration, betrayal, and rage pouring out in every swing. He tried to fight back, but I was too far gone. The world narrowed to just him and me, a storm of fists and fury that neither of us could escape. He wasn't the smug boss anymore, wasn't the man who thought he could toy with people's lives. He was just a coward, caught in the wreckage of his own arrogance. By the time I stopped, Alex was slumped against the wall, blood trickling from his nose and mouth. My knuckles throbbed, and I could feel the weight of what I'd done settling in. But for the first time all day, I didn't care. "You'll never touch her again," I muttered, my voice raw. I turned and walked away, leaving him crumpled on the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of his own choices. The morning after the fight came like the slow aftermath of a storm. My hands throbbed with pain, the skin around my knuckles raw and swollen from the blows I'd landed. The house was eerily quiet, just me and the wreckage left behind, both physical and emotional. The living room was still a mess from the night before. Shattered glass, overturned furniture, memories scattered like debris. And Mia was gone. No texts, no calls. Nothing. For the first time in years, I felt empty. The anger that had consumed me, the rage that had propelled me to Alex's doorstep. It was gone now, replaced by a strange numbness. But beneath that numbness, I knew something worse was waiting. It wasn't over. Not even close. I sat on the couch, staring at my bruised hands, trying to make sense of the mess I'd made. But there was no making sense of it. What was done was done. I told myself that Alex deserved every punch I'd thrown, that he had brought it on himself. But deep down, I knew the fight wasn't just about him. It was about everything. The betrayal, the humiliation, the loss. I'd lost control because I couldn't bear the idea that I'd become a joke, someone other people pitied. The weight of it all settled on my chest, pressing down until it hurt to breathe. I kept telling myself it would be fine, that the worst was over. But part of me knew there was a lie. And then the knock came. It was firm, loud, and deliberate, the kind of knock that tells you trouble is standing on the other side of the door. My heart skipped a beat as I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans, hoping, foolishly, that it was anything other than what I feared. But when I opened the door, my worst fears were confirmed. 2 police officers stood on the porch, their expressions unreadable, hands resting casually on their belts. "Are you Mr. Reynolds?" one of them asked, though it wasn't really a question. I nodded slowly, my stomach knotting tighter with each passing second. "We need you to come with us," the officer said, his tone firm but not unkind. "There's been a complaint filed against you. Assault and trespassing." My mouth went dry. I knew, without needing to ask, who had filed it. Alex. The police station smelled like stale coffee and cheap disinfectant. I sat in a small, windowless room, the fluorescent lights humming above me, waiting for the paperwork to be processed. I tried to stay calm, but every minute felt like an eternity. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios, each one worse than the last. Alex had filed a statement. Of course he had. The man was nothing if not predictable, always looking for a way to flip the script to come out on top. And now, after humiliating me and wrecking my marriage, he'd found a way to twist the knife even deeper. Eventually, my lawyer, Ben, showed up, a sharp, no-nonsense guy I'd hired years ago for some minor work disputes. I'd never expected to need him for something like this. "They're charging you with assault and breaking and entering," Ben said, sitting across from me, his voice low. Alex made it sound worse than it was naturally. "Claims you showed up at his house unprovoked and attacked him." "Of course he did," I muttered bitterly, clenching my fists. Ben raised an eyebrow. "Did you?" I looked away, guilt and anger twisting together in my gut. I gave him what he deserved, Ben sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I get it, but this is serious. You're looking at prison time, 3 years minimum, maybe more. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. 3 years. My entire life, everything I'd worked for, gone in the blink of an eye. All because of one moment of rage. I leaned back in the chair, rubbing my hands over my face. What do we do? Ben gave me a grim smile. I'll do what I can, but it's going to cost you. The trial came faster than I'd expected. A blur of legal jargon and cold stares from people who had already made up their minds about me. Alex sat smugly on the other side of the courtroom, his face swollen from the fight, but his eyes gleaming with triumph. He knew he'd won, at least for now. Mia wasn't there. I wasn't surprised. She'd stayed gone after I threw her out, leaving me to face the fallout alone. And maybe that was for the best. I didn't know what I would have done if she'd shown up. When the judge read the sentence, 3 years in prison, everything inside me went cold. I barely heard the rest. All I could think about was how everything had crumbled. My marriage, my job, my future. Gone. But then Ben leaned in close, his voice low and steady. We'll appeal, he whispered. I've got a plan. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal maneuvers, paperwork, and negotiations. Ben worked every angle, pulling favors, making deals. It cost me nearly everything, my savings, what was left of my dignity, but in the end, he managed to pull off a miracle. He convinced the court to grant me bail while we appealed the sentence. $75,000, a price that nearly wiped me out. But I paid it. And Alex? As part of the deal, I had to pay him $10,000 in damages, a bitter pill that almost made me choke. The idea of giving that smug bastard a single cent made my blood boil. But it was the only way to stay out of a prison cell, so I swallowed my pride and wrote the check. When it was all over, I stood outside the courthouse, the weight of the last few weeks pressing down on me. I'd avoided prison, for now, but at what cost? My marriage was in ruins. My career was over, and I was broke, left with nothing but the bitter knowledge that Alex had won in every way that mattered. But as I stood there on the courthouse steps, watching the city move on around me, one thing became clear. It wasn't over. Not yet. Life after the trial felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Everything familiar behind me, the unknown stretching endlessly ahead. I wasn't in prison, but it didn't feel like freedom either. The savings were gone, the house felt empty, and my career had shattered with Alex's statement. I was technically out on bail, waiting for appeals to grind through the system, but nothing about my life felt like it belonged to me anymore. Mia stayed silent through it all. No calls, no messages. She'd slipped away into the void, and maybe that was for the best. Part of me wanted to believe she felt some kind of regret, that she was lying low, waiting for the dust to settle. But another part of me knew she was probably with Alex, or maybe with someone else entirely, drowning her shame in someone else's arms. I told myself I didn't care, that whatever love or anger I'd once felt for her had burned out like the last embers of a dying fire. But the truth gnawed at me every night. I was left alone with my thoughts, and the silence felt like a punishment all its own. A week later, as I sat nursing a beer in the dim light of the kitchen, Albert called again. Hey, he said, his voice cautious. You need to know something? I could tell from the weight in his voice that whatever it wasn't good. What now? I muttered, already bracing for more bad news. It's about Alex, he said slowly. He's been bragging around the office, saying that what happened wasn't just some random thing. He told a few people it wasn't the first time he's done something like this. Albert paused. He's saying he has videos. A cold shiver ran down my spine. What do you mean, videos? He filmed stuff, man, Albert said, his voice dropping to a whisper. People, women, at his parties. I don't think Mia knew she was being recorded, but he's got her on his phone. That's what he's telling people. Says he keeps everything, just in case. The beer bottle in my hand felt heavy, and my heart pounded as I tried to process what Albert had just told me. This wasn't just a drunken mistake. Alex had planned this, recorded it, and now he was holding it over Mia like a trophy. He hadn't just ruined my life. He was still toying with it, playing some sick, twisted game where we were all his puppets. I sat there in silence, gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. Does Mia know? I finally asked. Albert sighed. I don't think so. But if she does, well, she hasn't exactly done anything about it, has she? A bitter laugh escaped me, sharp and hollow. Of course she hadn't. Why would she? The anger returned, slow, deliberate, like smoke curling through a room. It wasn't the explosive rage that had driven me to Alex's house the first time. This was colder, sharper. It was the kind of anger that made you think clearly, see things for what they truly were. Alex had won once, but not again. I knew now that it wasn't enough just to hit him and walk away. He wasn't going to stop until he had destroyed everything. And that left me with only one option. I had to finish what I started. I spent the next few days planning. I was careful, methodical, making sure every step was precise. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about taking back control. For too long, I let other people steer my life. Mia, Alex, the courts. No more. I knew exactly where to find him. Alex loved routine. He'd made the same mistake arrogant men always made. He thought he was untouchable. Every Thursday night, he hit the same rooftop bar downtown, bragging to his friends about his latest conquests, pretending like he owned the world. And tonight would be no different. I waited outside, watching the entrance from across the street. My breath fogged the cool night air, but my hands felt steady. No hesitation this time, no second thoughts, just the slow, focused rhythm of purpose. Around midnight, Alex finally stumbled out, laughing with a couple of buddies as he fumbled with his phone. He didn't notice me at first, too busy scrolling through whatever sick content he kept saved there. It was only when his friends left him alone, walking off toward their cars, that he finally looked up and saw me. His grin faltered for just a second, but that second was all I needed. I crossed the street with deliberate steps, the weight of everything that had happened driving me forward. "Hey, Alex," I said, my voice calm. Too calm. His smirk returned, that same smug expression I'd seen at the trial, the one he wore at the party. "What, back for round two?" He sneered, still drunk on his own arrogance. I didn't answer. I just reached for his phone, the one with everything on it. "What the?" he started, but before he could react, I grabbed the phone from his hand and slammed it to the pavement. The screen cracked, shards of glass scattering like stars across the sidewalk. "You think this is over?" I growled, leaning in close enough for him to smell the anger on my breath. "You're done, Alex. Done?" He staggered back, fear flickering behind his eyes now. "You can't." But I could, and I did. I walked away from the bar that night without looking back. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't justice. But it was enough. The video was gone, the evidence destroyed. And with it, Alex's power over me, or Mia, was shattered too. Maybe he'd try something again. Maybe not. But for now, it was over. And that was enough. I never heard from Mia again after that. Part of me wondered if she knew what I'd done, if she felt any kind of relief or regret. But I stopped waiting for answers that would never come. Some things aren't meant to be fixed. Some betrayals cut too deep to heal. The appeal came through a few weeks later. My sentence was reduced to probation, thanks to Ben's relentless work. I paid off what I owed, sold the house, and left town without saying goodbye to anyone. Starting over wasn't easy, but it was better than living in the wreckage of what my life had become. Sometimes late at night, I still see flashes of the party in my mind. I hear the laughter, the music, the sound of that door creaking open at 3 a.m. But the memories don't hurt as much anymore. They're just fragments, pieces of a story I've already survived. And as I drive down unfamiliar roads, far away from the people and places that try to break me, I remind myself of one thing. I may have lost everything, but I'm still here. And for now, that's enough.